Welcome to the Book of Urm, Tales of Piecora, the Haunted Fortress. Chapter 14, Separation. Separation. "Has Orta ever been on his own?" asked Piecora quietly. She lay on the bed, facing the ceiling, and Ravses lay next to her with Orta sleeping between them. Ravses remembered just lying back and falling immediately to sleep after her conversation with Piecora, utterly exhausted from the previous day. Sometime during the night, Ravsesa woke up to find Artur sleeping between them, and once again she marvelled at her young son's trust for their Xianjian guide. "No, not ever," said Ravsesa. "I've tried to let him play with other children when we lived in Eindungzirk, but he always kept to himself and watched the others. I'd tell him, 'Go on, son, look at the game they are playing, have some fun.' But he would just look on and wouldn't leave my side. Maybe he was too young." "I've known children like that," said Piecora after a while. "They're usually the ones with parents." Ravses shifted to her side and asked, "What do you mean?" "All children have parents." Piecora lifted her arm straight in front of her toward the ceiling, locked her fingers together, arched her back, and stretched. Ravses heard numerous joints and vertebrae audibly crack like grinding stones together. She wasn't wearing her antlers, so her black hair flowed like spreading molasses over her pillow and beneath Aorta's sleeping face, nuzzled against Piecora's shoulder. Piecora then looked quickly at Ravses and chuckled, where to begin? Then she noticed Ortur and watched him adoringly through sleepy eyes. Ravsesi wondered at what complex thoughts might be filling Piecora's mind while she gazed at her sleeping son. Finally, Piecora sighed and said, "Xianjians, for the most part, are very free with their affection for each other, as I told you last night. We have children all the time, and we keep living our lives. Our society is structured to raise children within the community. Most children do not know their own parents, and this isn't disgraceful or even unfortunate in our society. It's just normal." Slowly, Piecora gently raised herself from the bed, while trying not to wake Artur. "However, there are times when people do marry," she said as she stood up. "If two people, male or female, or any combination thereof, feel committed to each other, and wish to share their lives together and remove themselves from our Agiade Funamblia is our word for it. In the common, it would mean something like societal family or communal propagation. But this concept is foreign to Canonians and Muthans, I know. But if two people commit to each other and decide they want to create their own family, bear and raise their own children, then they must marry and be recognized. In these cases, there is never divorce. There are no laws to separate them. They are committed for life, for better or worse." Ravses lifted to her elbow as Artur began to rouse from his deep slumber. "There is a tone in your voice," said Ravses, "as if this isn't something aspirational or hopeful or lovely. It sounds beautiful to me, but you don't seem to like it. Or did something happen to you?" Piecora moved to the wash basin, bent down, and submerged her entire head into the cold water from the night before. Then she lifted it, flipping her long black hair into the air behind her. Cold water showered across the entire room, with droplets raining down over the bed and landing on Artur and Ravsesa. Piecora turned around and sat ungraciously on the side of the tub, leaned down behind her, and removed the plug to let the water out. Then she began squeezing the water out of her hair and braiding it. Ravses found it humorous that no matter what Piecora wore or what she was doing, even in these long sleep shirts they both wore, there was always some part of Piecora's anatomy exposed. An arm, a leg, a shoulder, in this case both of her arms bent over her head, that displayed Piecora's striking anatomy. The nimble movements of her strong fingers braiding her hair sent corded ripples of engaged tendons and sinewy muscles down her wet forearms, biceps, and shoulders, and even down the sides of her scapula and trapezius. It was as if she was formed and chiselled in dark, soft auburn clay, with smooth creases and lines and shapes that naturally accentuated her figure, and she was beautiful. Ravsese wondered if all Xianjians were constructed like Piecora. The only other Xianjian she had met so far, Ogiom, was of Xianjian blood, though raised in Canonia, and somehow that seemed to lessen the sharpness of his physicality. Granted, he was still a large muscular man befitting for a servant of the Xianjian animal spirit bear, but he had a rounded quality to his large frame, like rolling moors in a field, as if being born and raised in Canonia provided comforts that native-born Xianjians never had, nor ever expected. Ravsese found herself both desiring and afraid to visit the homeland of Piecora and Ogiom, even though the ship was taking her seemingly right to its doorstep, to Kirdaneth, the frontier town that lay between Ediotor and Xienja in the wildlands. For herself, Ravsese felt like a featureless ragdoll, barely held together, with no attractive qualities whatsoever. Pale as white parchment and just as frail, prone to tearing apart in the slightest breeze and burning up in the sunlight. For the life of her, she could not understand how she could possibly have earned Piecora's affections, for in no way could she match who and what Piecora was. In fact, she considered herself the opposite of everything she had observed Xianjians to be, and since meeting Piecora she had done nothing except depend on her. Ravsese felt simply unattractive in her own eyes, worthless to everyone except for her own son, and she considered her own temperament, personality and character to be fittingly the same. Both Piecora and Ravsese wore the same long, comfortable sleep shirts offered to all guests of the sovereignty. Matching robes and slippers were also provided next to the bath, and everything was embroidered with the name Sovereignty in flowing High Canonian script in silver thread. As no children were expected to be on board the Sovereignty's maiden voyage over the wildlands, Otor was graciously given some clothes from Daphne Mulankai's family, including the sleep shirt that he now wore. Ravsese watched Piecora's brazen movements with wonder, recalling how she first felt about the Xianjian when they first met in the tavern that fateful night in Coast Haven. She couldn't even recall the name of the place at this point. She hasn't changed at all, thought Ravsese. She is still the same person I met that night. Come to think of it, I don't believe I have either. And yet, now we are so close, as if we have always known each other. But still, there is so much mystery inside of her. So much I don't know, and so much I am still learning. I wonder if she feels the same about me. Some time went by while the water drained out of the marble tub, until Piecora turned the iron crank in the wall over the faucet to allow hot water to begin replenishing the cold water. As she lazily traced circles in the water with her finger, she turned back to face Ravsese and said, "It sounds beautiful. The thought of marriage, yes, it does. We all think this way. What if I should find that special person to commit the rest of my life to? Of course, many desire to keep the freedoms they have within Agiadae and shun the committed life. For as I said, there are no laws for separation. So once you commit, you are bound with that person until the end of your days. Unfortunately, that comes prematurely to people sometimes, if their commitment sours after a while." Piecora let out a long sigh, as if finally reaching a point she had been delaying until she couldn't know more, and continued, "So, like everything else in Xianjian society, we place our trust, our faith in the hermit. Tukurai is our name for him. He lives in a cave far to the south of us, and every year we go on pilgrimage to see him. It is a long trip, sometimes weeks depending on the weather and many other dangers. All Xianjians aspire to go on pilgrimage and seek the hermit for the wisdom that he imparts to each of us as we camp in front of his cave. After a few days of this, we leave, returning to Xienja with whatever enlightenment we received from him. For some, this is kept private and meant only to them individually. For others, they are open with it, and they ask him about the next harvest and whether they should move their home to better soil, or how to treat a sick horse or child, or how to resolve a dispute over property rights, or many other problems and complaints that xianjians bring to the hermit. But one thing is required to be conducted by the hermit, and that is xianjian marriage. People who desire to commit their lives to each other must go on pilgrimage and ask the hermit if he sees love within the two people for each other. No matter how they may feel about each other, Tkurai sees into each of them and has the final word. If he denounces the union, then the bond is forfeit and they cannot officially marry, or at least it is not recognized in society. No one questions the hermit's judgment. He sees and knows all, so they say. Ravses detected sour sarcasm in Piecora's voice. "It sounds like you don't like this arrangement at all," she said. "It angers you." "When I was a child, I believed in the hermit with all of my heart," said Piecora, still braiding her wet hair while the hot water continued to rise in the tub behind her. "I have 2 parents myself who raised me and my 2 brothers. We had a wonderful family, blessed by the hermit. I saw what his blessing meant to us. We counted him as the reason for our good fortunes. Then my older brother left and never returned, and I began to doubt the source of our faith. Why is it only the hermit that gets to decide what people feel for each other? Why must he alone ordain what is proper and what isn't? Has he ever been wrong? What authority does he have? He is just a man. What is so special about him? What makes him different from us, and why do we fall at his feet?" I began to look around at other families who were committed to each other, and I found my answers. He was often wrong about who he allowed to marry. I started seeing my own family as the outlier, as so many other families dealt with hardship, misfortune, and abuse. And I wondered, what if we were happy because of us? Because we made it that way ourselves without any made-up blessings from the hermit? What if it was all a lie? She paused for a moment, as if the words reminded her of a long-ago betrayal still keenly felt. Piecora sighed heavily before continuing. "Then I wondered about why my older brother left, and where he was in the world, and my heart ached to see him again. Around the same time, my best friend from my childhood, a Banwar elf named Karui, went on her spirit journey, which is when young Banwar elves coming of age leave their home to seek their spirit companion. After many years of her being gone and not returning, I decided to go find her. My own journey led me to Hero, my soul bond, and I finally learned about the division of Xianjian souls between humans and animals, local to Xianjia, all invented by Tkurai, the hermit. I never found Karui, so I returned home with Hero and tried to tell people about what I experienced, that we each have a soul bond out there that we can reunite our soul with. Let's just say that didn't go so well, so Hero and I fled back into the wildlands, and I became the Xianjian guide for these bricklayer Canonians." "Winds," muttered Ravsese. "The hermit sounds like pure evil. He has your people tied around his finger and even decides who may marry and who is denied, and they do not realize their own suffering under him." "One cannot yearn for that which is hidden from them," said Piecora. "They don't know any better. Xianjia and the hermit have been together since the beginning." Moments of silence passed as Piecora finally completed weaving her lovely braids without her antlers. She stopped the hot water flowing in the tub, tested it again with her hand and said, "You know, I finally did meet the hermit once." "You went on pilgrimage?" asked Ravses, suddenly wondering if Piecora might have tried to marry someone in the past. "No, never a pilgrimage," Piecora said dourly. "If I were to ever visit the hermit at his cave, it would not be during the pilgrimage. It would be under very different terms altogether. I would go to slay him." Ravsese expected Piecora would say that, but such a violent declaration delivered so purposefully still caught Ravsese off guard. "What happened?" she asked. "Oh, that is a long story, my Greoya," said Piecora, using a Xianjian effeminate term of affection. "Let me just sum it all up with this. The Scythians have their name for Tkurai, for that is how old the man is, They call him Dethri Albanach, which loosely translates to the deceiver in the Low Canonian common speech. They confirmed what I began to believe when I was younger, and sure enough, they were right. Tekurai tried to have me and my friends killed while helping the Scythians. Because of him, 2 perished directly from his assassin's poisoned knife, and 1 fell victim to the power of the Fey realm due to his age, whose blood we used to conduct a ritual that Tekurai required in order to help the Scythians. It's all very twisted up, and ever since returning to this world, I must remind myself often to nurture the hatred I feel for him deep within my heart, for the day when I face him again. "How evil and vile this man is," Ravsez said distantly. "Say not evil, dear Ravsezi," said Piecora, holding up her hand. "I've learned that druids do not subscribe to notions of good or evil, nor do they adhere to the dictates of any traits ascribed to either side. Compassion, kindness, empathy or greed, ignorance, malice, these are all things that are meaningless to them. Only one thing has meaning to the druid: balance. Balance in all things and between everything. Nothing shall ever outweigh the other." Piecora demonstrated this by mimicking a balance with her hands, one up, the other down. Then she brought them level with one another. During this adventure I learned that the worldwide druidic community comprises concentric rings of power, influence, population, and authority. The outermost is the weakest, youngest, and least influential, whereas the innermost rings contain the strongest, oldest, and most influential of the druids. Within these innermost circles is the central ring around which everyone else receives their orders from. This central ring is made of 3 druids, called the 3 Hierophants. Tekurai is one of the 3, and the 2 others strive to keep his power in check. I learned all of this from the Scythians during this adventure. The reason why it takes the vigilance of both Hierophants to reign in Tekurai is because of 2 things. 1, he is ancient and powerful, and he is human, having long outlived his mortality, so quite possibly he has gone completely mad, or has become wildly unpredictable. No one can ever know the mind of Tekurai. The other thing is this. The majority of druids take a passive view of this issue with the balance. Generally, they do not interfere except in extreme cases. But this is not Tekurai. He takes a proactive approach to the balance. He needs to have his fingers on everything, constantly making adjustments everywhere, in order to achieve the kind of balance that he alone wishes. Needless to say, this approach is rather invasive to most societies, and most among druids think he goes too far. But no one is able to stop him, not even the combined strength of the other 2 Hierophants. Not completely, really. The best they can do is slow him and limit him where they may. So he generally comes and goes as he pleases, causing mischief in all parts of the world, only to correct them soon after, or for other druids to clean up his messes, all the while causing more harm than good. Piecora began getting dressed into her Xianjian travel garb as she continued. When we were sent into the Mistlands to take care of this issue in Cynthia, we quickly learned that we were expendable. First, it was Kirgri whose throat was slit by Ianthe, Tekurai's assassin, who had us all fooled into believing she was our guide into Fornea the Gal, fortress of vapours inside the Mistlands. Karui was very close to Kirgri, so when this happened, I witnessed an aspect of Karui I never saw before and will never ever forget. She turned to face both Ravsez and Aotor, who were now sitting up in bed watching Piecora, as if she were performing a ballad. "Karui, my dear friend, who I finally reunited with while lost in the Fey realm, suddenly changed into a beast, a horrifying, monstrous aspect of panther, with such terrible strength, such absolute rage, so full of sudden sorrow all at once, that before Ianthe could escape, the monster grabbed her arm and tore it from her body like a doll." Piecora made a pulling motion with one hand on her other arm, casually miming the arm falling to the floor. Ianthe fled for her life, but Shadia, our Cynthian friend and leader, chased after the assassin, and then I ran after them both. Before I could reach either of them, Shadia was lying in the mud, mortally wounded from the assassin's poisoned blade. She leapt through a tear between realities, the mistlands and the primal world that Tukurai was holding open for her. Then he shut it forever when Ayanti landed on the other side, with us stuck in the mistlands and my beautiful friend Shidia dying in the mud. Piecora sat heavily on the bed as she pulled on her Xianjian travel boots. Ravsese gently moved her hand through Piecora's black braids to rub the back of her neck as Piecora went on. "I'll never forgive that bastard. The balance be damned. Yes, Tukurai was critical in helping the people of Cynthia as he worked with Bojian Kremaran, the Aeon Wyrm, Dragon Queen of Kiahala. She is like a goddess who lives in our world and is tied to it. She is oath-bound to never harm a Cynthian, so she couldn't intervene when Anmora came to power. So, it was Bogian Kremaran who allied with Tukurai to make it all happen. But she is blameless, and I hold no fury for her, only love. For only by her power were Karui, Vinexi and I able to return to our world and in our time. She couldn't have known that Tukurai plotted to have us killed during the mission to slay Anmora, who was behind all of Cynthia's troubles. Or maybe she did, and we just happened to survive, so she saved us out of gratitude. Who knows how a dragon thinks? Only thing worse is an ancient mad druid, but this is why I am friends with Cynthia and have Bojian Kremaran's blessing of free passage through Kiahala." She then turned and looked closely at Ravses with eyes that trembled with seething emotions. "And this is why I'll never forgive the hermit, and why I will slay him the moment I see him again." Then, the next instant, Piecora's face transformed into a wide smile, and she looked down at Aotor, tussling his messy hair, and said, "What do you think of all that, boy? Quite the long tale, eh? I wonder if any of it is true." "I know it is true," said Ravses quietly, catching Piecora's eyes again. "I know you cannot lie, and even you would not. It is what I love about you." Again, for the second time, Ravses heard the words escape her mouth, while wishing she could corral them back in. But also for the second time, Piecora did not flinch, but instead leaned forward and quickly kissed her again before standing up. "I'm going to have a walk about and see what's going on outside. Enjoy the hot bath and I'll return with some food," Piecora said while striding across the room, closing the door as she left. Aotor looked up at Ravsesa, and for a long moment she wondered what possible thoughts could be lurking behind those large, expressive eyes. Did he notice the change between his mother and Piecora? There was something churning behind his eyes and his expression, something mature beyond his age, as if he understood everything and so much more. She hadn't noticed this look before. It was something altogether new to her, and she wondered which it was, the black thing from the bottom of the sea, or the dragon god of ancient Aquala. But before she could ask him any questions, he said quietly like a little boy again, "I miss Valesh. I wish she were coming with us." A little while later, Ravsesi and Aotor were fully dressed, washed, and had just eaten breakfast brought up by one of the town's couriers, when the door to their rooms suddenly opened. Ravsesi had just completed adjusting her favourite outfit, the one she procured from the town of Knightsport with Cassandra Blaylos, the innkeeper of the River Watch, and Aotor was leaning over the marble tub, watching the water swirl down the drain while wearing the outfit he got from Knightsport. Valesh stood in the doorway, and Aotor hopped and ran into her open arms, and the two hugged each other warmly. "I have a few days before the ship sails to wander around and be a kid again, Aotor," said Valesh to Aotor with mock seriousness. "You must remind me what that is like before you ship off on your adventure." Ravses joined them and embraced them both. "I thought about you all night, Valesh. How are you doing with Eindon?" she asked. "Oh, they love him around here. Well, of course they do, he employs them, but really he is a saint. Kindness to a fault, as they say. But he is easy to manage, so I like him too. I can rein him in," she said with a sarcastic curtsy. Ravzis then realised that Valesh was going to be just fine as Eindon's representative. "Now I'm taking your son with me, and we're going to run around and make some mischief, maybe even get mud on our clothes. I'm sure it will be unbearable for you, milady, but I trust you will enjoy some time on your own, maybe meet some people or purchase something in the town. Feed the local economy. G'day then." Before Ravzesa could respond, Valesh grabbed Artur's hand and pulled him through the door, down the hall, and they were gone. Ravzes felt her heart swell with emotions, noting that not once did her son look back at her. Over the next several days, Ravzes would see her son run off with Valesh each morning, and with each passing day she worried less about what they were up to. Piecora mostly spent her time on her own, talking with people and getting things ready for their departure. Ravzes could tell that each day brought more responsibility to Piecora, as more people demanded her time and attention, and each night Piecora would mention new names that she had met when they spoke quietly in their room together. For herself, she strolled around the town absently, and no one bothered her. Either she was simply that easy to overlook, or there was some edict from Eindon, or even Piecora to leave her alone. They were not impolite. On the contrary, the people in this makeshift frontier town were lovely for the most part. But they left Ravzese to her thoughts and allowed her to go wherever she pleased. Strangely, they refused to take her money, and she wondered if, again, Eindon declared that Ravzese should not pay for anything. So Ravzese made sure to not be too covetous or imposing with her interactions with the townsfolk in the shadow of the sovereignty, always looming overhead, always in view no matter where she went. Occasionally she would see Piecora with Ogiom either on the prow of the ship pointing in various directions, or beneath the ship inspecting the hull. Piecora's loud laughter rang through the air like large dinner chimes, and Ravzes would think to herself, "I never make her laugh like that," but then she would immediately hush herself as if scolding an inward child. On the evening before departure, all of the townsfolk gathered in the town's largest hall for a feast. Amidst the eating, drinking and dancing, the sounds of laughter and music filled the air and echoed across the surrounding hills and mountains adjacent to the town and the sovereignty. Piecora spent most of the time with Ogiom, and Ravzes knew this was purely meant to show everyone the close alignment between the captain of the sovereignty and the Xianjian guide, and they spoke for each other. Ravzes also knew this was to enforce their authority and collaboration, which would be critical for the sovereignty's maiden voyage. Still, it bruised her heart, and she couldn't help it, though she would never show it outwardly to Piecora. Somehow, though, Ravzese thought that Piecora knew anyway. She always seemed to know how Ravzese felt about things, which unnerved her. Artur and Valesh stayed close together, pointing, mocking, and laughing at the carousing adults. Ravzes's heart ached for the boy, knowing that leaving in the morning would be so hard for him. She didn't really know what to expect from him, actually. She might not even be surprised if he snuck off the boat and stayed with her in the town. But Ravzes knew he had to leave. Both of them did. All of this, all of these people and these memories would be gone within a month, dispersed to wherever their fates lie, and in the spring, this valley would overgrow all evidence of this monumental project as if it never happened. Thus, Ravzes always kept her eye on Artur and always within earshot. That night, Ravzese and Artur slept alone for the first time since arriving at the sovereignty. Neither of them could sleep, so Ravzese got up, lit the lamp on the table, and set up the chessboard. "Artur, come teach me how to beat Valesh in this game," she said. "I will want to challenge her when we see her again." It was the only thing she could think of to distract their restless minds and lull them to sleep, while giving her son something to look forward to. So tomorrow might go a little easier for him. He came over and sat down in front of her, looked up at her doubtfully, but then moved one of the pieces, saying, "She always starts with this pawn." I think she only had one teacher. After being informed of which move to counter it with, she asked him, "Tell me, did you have a teacher? You seem to know quite a bit more about chess than she does." "Icky teaches me," he said. Ravsez felt a chill curl up her spine to the tips of her ears at the sound of that name again. "Why does Icky teach you chess?" she asked. "He says that we invented it, and no human should have the satisfaction of winning at our own game," Otto said, shifting his bishop diagonally to another square. "You now have 3 options that are all correct, maybe a 4th if you bait my knight. But I won't fall for that, so you're stuck with 3. Icky says that we invented chess. Who is we?" Ravsez asked. "It is a game invented in ancient Nalupizausu by a woman named Izora of House Shikwas, a minor house of House Pizauskul," he said. Ravsesi felt unnerved by hearing her young son saying these evil names from their ancient past, especially the house of Empress Tiafwen, the same line that she and her son come from. Many lines of Devilkin come from Izora, but this game is what she is famous for. It was designed during the war. "Ortor?" Ravsesi began carefully. "You know, the name Devilkin. It is a harsh, nasty name. You know that, right? We are called Unskavia. Mumi, we were named Unskavia by our oppressors, but it was more for them than us. It isn't what we are. It doesn't define us and never has," Otto said quietly, looking up at her with studious, lecturing eyes. Ravsez had never heard her son talk this way before, especially to her. "We are Devilkin. We come from devils and humans. It is very simple to accept. Sad but true. It doesn't mean we have to be cruel or evil. We still get to choose who we are. But I'd rather know what I am and where I come from than believe in some made-up name for us because of the shame our leaders bear for the sins of their ancestors." Ravsez sat for a long moment and searched herself for any rebuke to her son's claims, but couldn't find any because he was right. The name Unskavia was a combination of the Mutan words for contained and enslaved. Muth itself was a derivative of the word pardon in the language of ancient Nalupizausu. After the cataclysm, the houses of those who cavorted with the devils, creating the numerous lines of Devilkin that still persist, brought great shame on the other human houses that refused the temptation. These same surviving human houses came together and founded Muth after the peninsula was formed from the Salt Sea. They committed to outlawing all efforts to reach the 9 hells again, yet they also felt responsible for the remaining progeny of those other evil houses that wandered the broken lands after the cataclysm. To rectify this, they gathered up as many Devilkin as they could and placed them in the district of Eindungzirk within their capital city, Norschlan, where they remain to this day. Devilkin was a slur that was safe to use among fellow Unskavians as a term of endearment and shared suffering, but they hated it when outsiders used it. Finally, Ravseze asked, "Did Icky tell you all of this?" "Yes, Mumi," said Ortor. "He knows a lot about us. He's happy you found the ring. He wants you to use it when it's time, but don't worry, I won't let it happen." Again, Ravsezi felt a chill run all over her body. "What do you mean? When will be the time?" she asked hesitantly. Ortor shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know. He said he'll tell me when it is. My guess is Ediotor, but it's just a feeling." Then he placed his hand on hers, surprising Ravsez, and said, "But Mumi, don't be frightened. I know what he wants to do and it won't happen, trust me, I'm in control." "I want to be rid of it, but I can't take it off," she heard herself say, as if from a distance. "It's your ring," said Arthur. "It belongs to you, and it's pretty on you. Why remove it?" "Because it's evil, Arthur," she reprimanded coarsely. "I hate this ring. I wish I never found it." Rarely did she ever raise her voice at Arthur, but this time her anger escaped her so suddenly it surprised and frightened her. Arthur removed his hand from hers and said, "Mumi, I think you'll not have to wear it forever. I think it's important now, because it helps us play along with Icky. As long as Icky thinks you'll use it, he protects us. But that won't always have to be the case. There will come a time when all of these problems will go away." He then got up, stood next to Ravsez, and put his arms around her. "I'm really tired now, Mumi. Thanks for playing with me. I'll show you more later. But right now, let's sleep. And don't worry, I'm not staying here. I'll miss Valesh, but I'm not leaving you. I'll never leave you, Mumi." The morning of the launch was a spitefully cold winter day. Jagged wisps of white clouds streaked across a bruised slate-coloured sky. Winds whipped through the town and over the sovereignty like a deluge of flowing spirits from the realm of shadow seeking the warmth of the living. Flakes of snow came down and blew in the swirling wind currents, shaping the turbulent air into primordial, eerie physical forms. Eindon stood on the prow of the ship, wrapped in a heavy black wool cloak, by the gigantic wooden ship's wheel, with the crew standing in 2 lines on either side of him. Oiom stood on his left, Piecora on his right, and Hyero flew above, navigating the criss-crossing winds. Valesh sat next to Artor and Ravseza among the passenger galley. The passengers all sat huddled together as Eindon's audience, while the rest of the townsfolk surrounded the sovereignty far below. The ropes and ladders had been pulled up, and the sovereignty was about to set sail into the wildlands, but not before Eindon's speech. "Why the sovereignty?" he crooned. "Why go into the wildlands? Why Kyodaneth? Why Ediotor? What is the goal?" He allowed for dramatic pause as the winds whipped over the sovereignty and rustled through the great canvas sails that were currently tied around the 3 main masts. Ravsez couldn't hear anyone nor see them from where she sat high up on the top deck. "The name of our beautiful creation is the sovereignty because it represents sovereign innovation, sovereign collaboration, and sovereign power among several nations to create this new sovereign nation to exist on its own as it sails through the wildlands, representing all who built it. Helicles brought its knowledge of windcraft and the power of the sun. Muth brought the energy of Blackrock. Brenz brought its ingenuity of automation. Thrunda, yes, Thrunda. No dwarves are here with us today, but they lent us their schematics of steam. And finally, let us not forget Canoniah." Then he lowered his voice and said mockingly, "Aye, let us not forget Canoniah, shall we? I would thank Canoniah for making this all happen, for supporting this effort and funding it, but I cannot. After years of beseeching the seat of power in Alagost, years of currying favour among the 7 cities, they would not approve it, so I had to do this all on my own, hidden from the view of their bureaucracy and paranoid eyes. Canoniah did not want this to happen, so Canoniah stood aside. But when the sovereignty returns from the wildlands, and with everything we learned and gained from Edeotor, oh, they will thank us then. They will line right up. We must prove the sovereignty to them, and they will want us to build more. In fact, both they and Sienja will want more ships because of the increased trade the sovereignty represents to both countries. To travel freely through the wildlands on ship. Just think of that kind of future for both Canonia and Sienja alike." Ravsez heard a dull cheer from the crowd below. "But really now, where did the money come from? What is the source of this wealth? Who has been paying you this whole time over these long, arduous years, my dear friends? Today I make a confession and a proclamation, both of which are long overdue. This is not my wealth. It never was. Behold, what you have built today, and that which has sustained you all these years, and will continue to care for each of you and your families with work, homes and financial security after this day and the days and years ahead, is none other than the Callistico Family Trust." Again, Eindon paused for dramatic effect, and Ravsez only heard the wind and the occasional cough from below. No cheer arose from his adoring crowd, and she wasn't sure if Eindon expected any. She knew how masterful he was at this, so watching him was like studying a fine artist from legend. She knew all too well not to assume that he wasn't in complete control, even when it felt awkward. "And now this is my proclamation. I announce to you the return of the Callistico family to its rightful glory. I present to you Valesh Callistico. Valesh, stand up and reveal yourself, please." Begrudgingly, Valesh stood up, letting go of Alta's hand only at the very last second, as she strode across the deck to stand next to Eindon. She leaned over the prow and waved, and Ravsis finally heard the crowd cheering around the sovereignty. From Ravsis's vantage, looking at Valesh from behind and her beautiful white wool cloak, lined with rabbit fur and matching rabbit fur hat that covered her entire head, she seemed for the first time to be a woman and no longer a young teenage girl. Perhaps it was in the way she waved to the people below. The casual lift of the arm and resolute side-by-side twist of her hand. She has it in her, Ravsisi thought to herself, recalling her years of living among Muthan nobility. She was born for this. She will be a countess one day, maybe even queen. Maybe our Tor should stay behind. She giggled to herself at the sarcastic thought and covered it over with a polite cough. But looking at her son sitting next to her distilled any humour she felt in that moment, for his eyes were glistening with tears, his nose bright red from the cold, and his lips were shivering. In the palm of his little hand was a small gold chain, and on the chain was half of an Alagostan gold coin that was split perfectly in two. Ravsese realised that Valesh left this parting gift in his hand when she stood up to leave, and knew that Valesh carried the other half of the coin. A breaking of the heart, but a promise of their deep bond together, and a commitment to return to each other one day to reunite the coin and their hearts, and make them whole again. Gently she pulled his hood back over his head and put her arm around him warmly. She wished she could do something to protect his heart, but she knew he had to deal with this on his own. Then the crowd roared louder as both Eindon and Valesh descended from the prow of the ship on a roped platform lowered by a pulley, and they were gone. Autor leaned into his mother and buried his head into her chest. Ogiom then stepped forward to address the passengers directly. "Welcome to the sovereignty," he said as his calm, sleepy, deep voice pierced through the whistling breeze. "I hope all of you have found your lodgings comfortable and suitable for your needs. If at any point you need anything that wasn't appointed initially, please see the boatswain, Sifa Penrose." He gestured with his hand toward a woman standing on the other side of him from Piecora. She was a tall, middle-aged woman with a square jaw, piercing grey eyes, and sand-bleached light red hair tied in a long braid behind her head. She sported a wide-brimmed, dark leather and weathered hat, festooned with long, colourful feathers that danced in the cold breeze. Covering her from neck to toe was a long, high-collared overcoat, handcrafted from many coloured leather fragments patched together haphazardly. The colours muted and dull, and the leather pitted, frayed and worn down from years on the open salt sea. Her gaze hovered over the heads of the passengers as she stood motionless with her hands behind her back, like a statue dredged from the sea itself. "I would also like to point your attention to our two guides. Tharrell, will you stand up and join us, please?" Near the front of the audience, a man awkwardly stood from his seat and walked over to stand next to Ogiom and Piecora. He wore a white, soft wool cloak with the hood drawn over his head. On its back, the flaming chariot of Ares, or Dolg, was stitched in gold, the device of one of the 7 cities, Dolgithad. Ravsese recalled meeting Lord Cathrates on the Blue Star when they sailed up the Angraluin from Coast Haven, and the kind words the old man said to her. She wondered if he played any part in all of this, including getting the young Dolgithadan prince onto the sovereignty. The man turned around and revealed his plain cherubim face, looking hardly older than Autor, only taller and less supple. "Everyone, our maiden voyage on the sovereignty is blessed with the presence of Dolgithadan nobility. This is Prince Tharil Rinavil, who the King and Queen of Dolgithad has so graciously sent to us, allowing us to serve him and, by extension, the Dolgithadan throne through him. Already the sovereignty's maiden voyage is a landmark for history, but now it is doubly so, for the youngest prince of Dolgithad will not only be joining us, but he will serve as our guide through the wildlands. We will benefit much from his knowledge. He paused as the passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. Ravsese could feel the palpable tension among those who sat around her. Unlike Eindon, Ravsese felt it was well within her rights to question Ogiom's competency at public speaking. He may be able to govern a ship, but this was definitely not his strength. "But that is not all," he blurted, catching everyone off guard. Several chairs scraped against the deck as people jumped in their seats. "For we are also graced with none other than the Sienjan guide herself, Piecora Teorald of Sienja, and young Prince Tharil will be under her mentorship, so that as we learn from him, he will learn from her, and she will keep all of us safe." As if to punctuate this statement, Hiero flew low overhead and let out a high, wailing call that faded into the biting winds. Piecora, who wore a simple, heavy Sienjan grey cloak over her travel garb, gave a brief, shy wave of her hand, and slowly the passengers clapped in reassured confidence. It seemed that Piecora's presence was the necessary salve to assuage their uncertainty over Prince Tharil's ability. Prince Tharil, however, seemed taken back by this news, and rather put out upon hearing it. He looked up at Ogiom questioningly, spreading his hands as if annoyed to learn about this arrangement with Piecora for the first time. But Ogiom wrapped his large arm around the young man and smiled widely at the passengers. "There now, we are in good hands. Savour these next moments together as we prepare to break ground and leave for the wildlands." The audience clapped and cheered, seemingly excited for the first time. After the speech, a woman seated on the other side of Valesh's vacant chair looked over at Artur and Ravsese. She leaned over and extended a sinewy, muscular arm and calloused hand in greeting. "Hello," she said in a surprisingly light and clear voice. "I'm Vula Katsara from the Morbanan realm, ex-gladiator. Pleased to make your acquaintance." Ravsese returned Vula's hand with her own, noting the tough working palms and fingers of the woman's hand as it engulfed hers. "Obliged, milady," said Ravsese. "I'm Ravsese, and this is my son, Artur." A wind caught Ravsese's hood and blew it backward, revealing her long white hair, pale skin, pink eyes, and curved goat's horns. "Ah! Unscavian, then," said Vula cheerfully. "I knew a lad in my prior life. Simsai was his name, didn't have another, just numbers on his neck. Went by the name Metal Devil when he fought in the games. Nice lad, strong legs, sharp teeth, and that tail of his gave him an edge in the games that we couldn't match. Wonder where he went off to." "Devilkin," said Artur, looking back at Vula while still leaning against Ravsese. Vula's expression changed to that of someone seeing a puppy suddenly chewing on their favourite shoe. "Well, that's a bit unkind, isn't it?" she admonished jovially. "I shan't call you that if it's all the same to you, my lord." "Sad but true," said Artur, sitting up and facing Vula while repeating the words he recited to Ravsese the other night. "It is what we are. The name Unskavia was given to us by—" Ravsese wrapped her arms around her son and pulled his hood all the way over his face playfully. "Haven't we just found our voice all of a sudden recently?" Ravsese said, while nervously laughing and jostling Artur. She then peeked his hood up and aimed his face at hers. "Some people wish to treat us respectfully, Artur, so you must let them even if it might sound strange to you. If they wish to call us Unskavia, it is because they are polite. They are being nice." She then looked at Vula and said, "Please don't mind my son, he means no offence. It's just that it's been a hard—" Vula raised her hand, stopping her short, and said, "I understand, milady. No harm done. Simsai shared many stories of his life with me." We grew close when we were young, training for the games. Those were hard times for us both, but especially for him. Something leapt to the surface from a dark corner of her mind, prompted by what Vula just said. "If I may," Ravsese asked after a moment of thought. "Where was it that you and Simsai trained for the Canonian Games? You said you were from the Morbannon realm. That is the land of Vlanstrad, one of the 7 cities, correct? City of Athena." Vula leaned on her elbow on Valesh's empty seat and smiled warmly. Ravsese noticed she had light green eyes and reddish-brown hair that blew in the wind beneath a cap of dark brown squirrel fur. From her wide shoulders hung a thick cloak, also of dark squirrel fur. "You know your lands, milady," she said, beaming. "But I'm not from Vlanstrad, nor was I born anywhere near there. No, I was born on a farm outside of Coast Haven. When I was very young, my family went to the market one morning in the city, and I got lost. Terrifying for a child as young as I was. Just a forest of legs, all moving around, and it's all you can do to avoid getting stepped on. Then I was whisked away, thrown into a cage with some others, and off I went to my new home and life. I spent all my growing years there until I was ready to fight in the games. Never saw my family again. Wouldn't know them, even if I did, as I forgot what they looked like. And if they saw me during my time fighting in the games, well, how would they know? I became Helga, barbarian of the north, sent down from the northern mountains to slay the Canonians." She made jabbing motions into Ortor's side, tickling his side, and he squirmed, giggling. But Ravsese looked at Vula with both pity and fear. Would this have been our fate? She wondered to herself. How many years would we have been held prisoner inside Hector-Myganta's dungeons? Would she even recognize Ortor after being so thoroughly groomed for violence and combat for the sake of entertainment? And what of her own fate? Vula noticed Ravsese's expression and slid closer to them, now seated in Valesh's chair, and said, "I can see that you know something of my story." Ravsese breathed deeply before responding, suddenly remembering all at once the many dangers she and Artor faced since arriving in Coast Haven. "I do know," she said quietly. "We were very lucky, Artor and I. We had people helping us. I can only imagine what—" Her voice trailed off as she lost herself in her own thoughts, but Vula cut her off and brought her back to the present. "No need to wander there and torture your mind, love," Vula said. "I've had my whole life to comprehend my own lot. I've had to live with it and make whatever I could from it. Some days are harder than others, but in the end, you are who you make yourself to be. Unscavian or devilkin, whichever you like." She poked more at Ortor, who squirmed again in mock torture. "Look at me," she went on. "Whenever I want, I can go back to me Havana accent any time I be wishing for it, 'cause I chose to ne'er forget it. Plus it gets me discounts at the shops." A flash of light drew Vula's gaze to the gold half-coin on the chain held in Ortor's hand. She closed his fingers around it. "Keep that safe, love," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "I'd put that around your neck now if I were you, and never take it off until it finds its other half." Ortor responded by dutifully pulling the chain around his neck, and then Vula tucked the coin under his shirt, patting it gently. "There now, snug as a bug." As Vula stood up to leave, Ravsese raised her hand to stop her and asked, "If I may, milady, what is your part in all of this? It seems Eindon chose with purpose everyone on this ship, besides Ogium's crew." Vula adjusted the strap around the waistline of her thick cloak and said, "Me? Oh, I'm here to protect the researchers when they go off ship. Otherwise, sit around, enjoy the view, drink, and get chuffed. You?" Ravsese quickly plotted through multiple thoughts at once until she mumbled, "Oh, I'm just hoping to not get in the way, honestly. I don't think I can offer anything to anyone." Vula bent down and said, "Now I know that isn't true. There is a purpose here for you both. Take me for example. I've made new friends just now. You've brightened my day, see that? We all play our parts." Then she strode off after a playful punch to Arta's shoulder. Soon after, a loud horn bellowed from somewhere above the ship, and at once the sails unfurled on all 3 masts. The ship rocked suddenly, and everyone on the ground below the ship gasped and cheered while dispersing quickly away from the ship. Ravsez noticed the crew was nowhere to be seen except for the unkempt helmsman who was gripping the large ship wheel tightly. His long, mangy, dark brown hair gave him a feral appearance, and his loose overcoat hung open on his taut, wiry frame, and both blew wildly in the wind, often at odds in which direction. The coat had no sleeves, leaving his dark, tattooed arms bare. The man looked up and suddenly howled into the cold winds. The passengers who remained on the deck shuffled uneasily to hold on to something, while others quickly descended into the lower decks. The ship rocked again, this time more harshly, and Ravsez heard the calls of sailors all around and above her. Straining her eyes into the grey sky, she could see figures climbing the ship's masts and rigging up and down as more sails were lowered and foisted into position. For a moment she suffered extreme vertigo, forcing her to quickly look back down and squint her eyes shut. "Ortor, it's happening," she said, as she held her son close to her. She was suddenly terrified and didn't know what to do or where to go. Paralysed with indecision, she and Ortor remained as the sole passengers left seated in the audience galley of empty wooden chairs on the top deck, directly beneath the foremost mast at the prow of the ship. She heard Ogiom's deep voice booming commands through the winds, now catching the sails all at once, and the ship's rocking became a steady cadence as she suddenly realised they were slowly rising. Peeking out from Arta's shoulder, she watched as the roofs of the town slowly fall beneath the deck's railing, gone from view, except for the mountains beyond. Sheer, unexpected terror overwhelmed Ravsez, and she buried her face in Artor's warm cloak as her son scrambled to his feet to stand on his wooden chair. "Mummy! Mummy! Look!" he cried in boyish excitement. Hazarding another glance from the confines of his body with her thin arms locked tightly around him, she saw the mountains gently lowering as the air filled with the sounds of heavy earth moving and scraping against a hard, sharpened metal surface, like a colossal blade being slowly drawn from the depths of the earth. Slowly they lifted higher and higher into the grey winter sky, and with each wind gust captured by the mighty sails above her, the ship jolted to the side as if being tugged on a giant leash, yearning to be free from its mooring. Never had Ravsez felt such debilitating panic in her life. The sounds, the winds, the biting cold, the movement of the ship as it slowly withdrew its monstrous vertical keel from the frozen ground below, the overwhelming chaos and strangeness of it all, overstimulated her into catatonic fright that separated her consciousness from her body. She was reduced to a mere presence, no longer associated with the body that housed her, that only saw through her forward-facing, unblinking eyes, and nothing more. Completely unaware of her arms, her legs, or any of her extremities, Ravsez gripped Ortor with all of her meagre strength, without feeling him or anything at all. Her ears flooded with the deafening sounds of her own accelerated pulsing blood. She was unable to turn her head or move any body part as she felt frozen in traumatized shock. The mountains continued to fall beneath the Sovereignty as it rumbled higher into the air, and still the constant noise of scraping, breaking, falling earth filled her ears. Suddenly, somewhere in her mind, she realized that Arta had slipped from her grasp, and she was lying on her side across both of their chairs, folded in a fetal position and her eyes frozen open. Distantly, she heard her son's voice shouting for Piecora, until finally a shadow overcame her, and she heard close in her ear the voice of her beloved Xianjian guide. "Stag! Oh, Ravsez, you poor girl, you're dying of fright. Spirits, I should have known," Piecora said, gently placing her hand over Ravsez's eyes. "Close your eyes, love, close your eyes. Shh! Breathe, breathe. close your eyes and breathe." Piecora shouted over her shoulder, barking out orders. "Autor, bring a blanket from below. You, there, hot water, now." The seizure consumed Ravsez. Her limbs locked in bent, twisted, painful contortions. Her fingers and toes splayed in all directions. She bared her sharp teeth uncontrollably, her facial muscles pulling her skin all the way back to her flattened ears, and she feared her eyes might soon leave their sockets. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that if this happened to her in Muth, while in Veklische Mansion, she would have been thrown into the dungeon for demonic possession, so menacing and garish her appearance must be at the moment. Her muscles and joints screamed in suffocating agony, as if they were being squeezed by her own suffering. The more pain she felt, the more they strained against her. She felt the weight of Piecora's thick Xianjian cloak cover her, and both its warmth and smell slowly began reinvigorating core parts of her mind that were malfunctioning like doors frozen shut. Another, heavier weight was thrown over her, and finally blissful darkness covered her. She felt her fully tensed arms and legs being rubbed furiously by many hands, and realized her breathing was coming and going in sharp, wheezing, staccato rhythms. Slowly, she began to warm by her own breaths within Piecora's cloak. Then the ship lurched hard, and the hull groaned loudly as the sails snapped with a unified thunderclap that rebounded off the surrounding hills and mountains, seizing the fullness of the icy winds bearing down from the mountains of Erith Amron. The ship no longer trembled as if it were being dragged upward through the ground, but now vibrated slightly and swooned gently as its long, slender, razor-sharp central keel finally rose all the way up from the frozen ground below, leaving behind a deep gash like a sheath for a dagger that belonged to a god. "We have separation! Separation!" shouted numerous voices, male and female, across the ship. Ogiom's deep voice boomed nearby. "Aye, the winds have us now, lads and lasses! Ready about! Clew the mainsail and rig for heavy weather! Steersman, drive us headlong into the wildlands! Gion Jabbar! Into the east we sail!" The Sovereignty leaned hard as the winds took hold of her, and Ravseza heard what sounded like chairs sliding over the deck to one side. Over her rapid breathing, she heard Piecora and several other people above her speaking and shouting while roughly massaging her limbs. After what seemed like years of her life, her eyes finally relaxed and refocused, and she was able to blink and lower her eyelids once again in the darkness of Piecora's cloak. She felt Artur on top of her, clinging with his arms and legs, mumbling repeatedly through the blankets, "I love you, Mumi, I love you, Mumi," over and over again. When the cloak lifted slightly in front of Ravsez's face, cold air rushed in, as well as the piercing grey light of the morning. Piecora's face filled her view as the Xianjian knelt down to check on her. There she was, the unflappable Xianjian guide, only wearing her travel garb in this freezing cold, and her thick braids blowing in the howling winds. And yet, Piecora simply reached her hand beneath the cloak and brushed aside Ravsez's long, stringy hair out of her face and mouth, drenched from sweat and drool. Ravsezi blinked from the cold air and bright light, realigning her eyes to focus on Piecora, and Piecora sighed. "Aren't you a sight?" said Piecora quietly. "Some might even think you're a scary monster. Little do they know." Ravsez realized her fanged jaws were still gaping open, bearing the fullness of her sharp teeth and gums. Quickly she unlocked her jaw and worked her long, slender tongue over her teeth in an effort to reproduce wetness in her mouth. "Water!" Ravsezi croaked dryly, sounding like a wheezing corpse. In response, Piecora lifted a familiar-looking clay mug to her face. "Here," said Piecora. "Hot water. It might taste foul, but that's my plue. Years of cider and maybe a few other things that lived in there. But it'll wet your palate and feel good going down." Ravsez slowly regained the use of her limbs as she emerged from her seizure, fumbled for the clay Xianjian plue with a trembling hand, and sipped the luxurious hot water inside. Piecora stood up and began speaking with someone, while Artur slid off and knelt on the deck to see his mother's face. His expression was full of concern, and his face was streaked with tears. "What happened, Mumi?" he asked. After several attempts at answering coherently, Ravsesi finally rasped, Mumi became very frightened, but your love saved me, my beautiful boy." She then worked her sore facial muscles into a garish smile that felt like it might split her face in two. Artur reached both arms under the cloak and hugged her aching head and said into her wet, tangled hair, "Don't do that again, Mumi. Never again." "I'll try," she mumbled in response. As she worked to control her breathing, she managed to say, "Tell me, you seem fine by all of this. You are so strong, Artur. You aren't afraid. I'm still very afraid. I can feel the ship moving and swaying beneath me, but it feels nothing like water." Artur pulled back, sat on his haunches, and barely containing his excitement, he shouted, "Mumi, it's the most exciting thing I've ever seen. We're flying, Mumi, we're flying." Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.